Hi, this is Pro Exam. A bit of a blip there at the start. Thanks a lot for joining us at this episode of the Living and Working Abroad show. This week we're going to take a preamble look over the Halloween budget and bonfire night election in America. And are you happy with that? Let's see. There's a few issues, and the reporting on the American election is just going ahead now. We'd hoped to time the announcement of the winner during our speech. Unfortunately, it came half an hour before. We're sort of broadcasting to you at 11 o'clock UK time, and at 10:30 it was announced that the Wisconsin declared and took Donald Trump over the edge. So if there's any comment while we're going through, we will update that, and then later in this presentation we'll go through a recap of some of the issues with the budget. But there's like seven key states in America that determine how the budget was going to go and what would win. Georgia, Carolina, Pennsylvania had already declared for Trump, and all the other major states had done that. California declared for the Democrats. That was 54 voting seats for the Democrats. So it all came down to the 4 states left: Arizona, Michigan, Nevada, and Wisconsin. But Trump was already on 266. He did 270 out of 538 college votes, and the states send their representatives, their college representatives, to vote. The vote of the state determines how they will vote in the college, and obviously 270 is 540. So if you've got 270 committed delegates going to the convention, you're going to be elected the president of the United States. The college members have to use the mandate that they get from the presidential election on bonfire night on the 5th of November. And and so Trump was sitting on 266 earlier this morning, and about half an hour ago Wisconsin came through. It was neck and neck. He was getting about 50% of the votes. He only needs 50% plus one. And generally all the outstanding swing states that they're talking about, they're all about 51%. So it's very, very narrow. And Trump just pipped it in Wisconsin, which is taking up to 276. So even though there's another 30, 40 seats, college seats still to be declared, he's going to win. Kamala Harris can't catch him. She's lingering back on 219. So they're giving up the ghost, and the die is cast. So now we have to look at what the impact of that is. We're at the end of a year where we've seen many elections. We talked about this at the start of the year. How is this going to affect the world? We've had elections in France, in Germany, in Italy, as well as in the UK and the EU, which have had a major impact on changing the demographics of that. And now we've got the US general election, which you see a radical swing and some record-breaking moments. Let's have a look at what Trump means for the world and for expats living and working abroad going forward. Trump is all about make America great again, but it's not just that, it's more than that. Trump is a disruptor. So when we look at EU, European elections, the French president, the general election generally voted the centre right, and yet the president still has sway while he's in power for another 2-3 years. So there's no real change. We got some radical change in Argentina when a new president was elected, and the democracy in Italy was a big enough swing to make a radical change. But essentially it's the same. Democracy is about generally always electing in the centre. It can be centre left or centre right, but democracy brings the average punter, and that's what it's designed to do. The British two-party system has failed us because there was a relatively useless government in power that has been replaced by what appears to be an equally useless party out of power. So it's interesting to see where that's going to go for the UK. The disruptor in the UK will be somebody like Nigel Farage. Now what Trump has managed to do is break into the two-party system to disrupt that and get himself appointed as a president. But there's something different this time. There's something different. Yes, he's maybe erratic, maybe he is more of a businessman than a politician, but he's there and he has been elected. Whatever you want to castigate media and political opponents, the electorate has spoken and the electorate has gone his way. But consider what happens in the American election of a president. An American president is only allowed 2 terms. This is his 2nd term. He can't run as president again. However, at age 78, he's already older than Joe Biden was when he was elected. And he didn't quite make it to the end. He's still alive at this point. He's still president through to January. But Trump may not survive, and his health may not survive. We wish him well, but it's a point to consider. The key point I want to make here is that Trump can't stand again. And if he's got control of the parliament as well as the presidency, like in France, the president has got some control and influence. So even though an opposition party is elected into the government, he's still able to manipulate that in France. If Trump is elected and the Senate and the Congress are a Republican in his party as well, that gives him a lot of power to maybe influence and do what he wants to create a new area for America. He's a disruptor that's been elected. When we've seen in Hungary, in Italy, in France, the electorate kicking the incumbent government because of the struggles and the travails post-COVID. The COVID affected the world, it affected everybody, and the recovery from that, the economic performance, the ability to move and the freedom to move didn't work. And the elections this year that we've seen, UK, Germany, France, Italy, and now USA, have kicked the incumbent government hard for not making a change and not making radical change. We've had elections in Georgia and Russia this year as well, and the incumbents did get in power, but that's a different situation. We've got autocrats in control of those democracies. So we've got quite a radical change now, and quite a radical president who's got 4 years to make America great again, to create a new America, to create a new area. So what will he do in the greater scheme of things to make America a strong, dynamic country again? And what can the legal system do to stop him doing that? If you're in power and able to change the law, then the law is the law. So when Putin was first elected as president in Russia, it was a democratic election, and he served his 2 terms, and then he switched places as president with his prime minister to be prime minister for a term while his prime minister was the president. They changed the law to allow Putin to become president again and be elected as long as people wanted to do him. So these are the scenarios that we've got in front of us, and it's what we could. So what? We're not saying that Trump is an autocrat. We're not saying his system will allow him to be an autocrat, but he has the potential to make radical change the way he wants. And he doesn't need to be considering 4 years' time and getting re-elected. He's never going to stand again. He's going to retire after this, from politics at least. So this is his chance to make his mark on the world. So what legacy does he want to leave for his children and for the natives in America? It's arguable that he understood the American electorate, whereas the Democrats and the media didn't. So this is where we are. So let's consider the regional influence that America's got now. If the USA is a global power, if the USA have got bases in the Indian Ocean, in the Atlantic, in South America, in the Middle East, in Europe, and in the Far East, in Asia, how is it going to deal with that power? What about the frustrated regional powers we've got around the world? We've got a world where we've got an asylum crisis. We call it migrants now. What's the difference between a migrant, a legal immigrant, and an expat? An expat relocates legally. And obviously we would support that, and our clients would support that, because we're making the investment and we're going through the legal process to relocate, to live in America, to live in Europe, to live in the UK. If you meet the requirements and you meet the rules, then that legal migration is possible. Once you've got residence in a country and you meet the rules, generally under international law, after 5 years you can get a permanent residency and then potentially citizenship. So some countries allow citizenship sooner. Some countries have golden visa schemes that allow you to get a permanent residency sooner. A permanent residency gives you citizens' rights without necessarily having a passport or voting rights. So it's equivalent of that. So a UK expat that's lived in the EU since pre-Brexit potentially got EU citizens' rights around Europe from the country that they're resident in. So there's a lot to be gained from that consideration about moving legally. After the Second World War, lots of big changes came around. America was the dominant power after the Second World War, and asylum seeking was created to protect people that were persecuted politically or militarily in their home country. That's what asylum's for. But it's been bastardized by whatever you want to call them, criminal gangs or businesses, to move people. But why do people want to move? Well, what's happened over the last 10, 20, 30 years is that the wealthy countries around the world, the Chinas and the Russia now, as well as the Europe and Americans, have given aid to the poorer regions of the world. If you consider the UK 100 years ago, the death rate under 20 for children was 50%. Medicines came in and that gradually improved, sanitation improved, and drinking water improved, and less and less children died. And over a couple of generations, families go from lots of children, 4, 5, 6 children, to 1 or 2. Then we see it in a country like Cyprus, where prior to got their European office, is that it was still very much at the turn of this century about young people getting married early as late teenagers and having children and having big families that would survive and then provide for the later ages. But coming from Ireland, and being a bit older, we saw that there still was big families. So my mother's sisters, siblings, all had 4, 5, 6 kids, because it was still done at that stage in that farming community in the 60s in Ireland. It's quite similar to a country like Cyprus in the 2000s, in the noughties. The generational thing changes, and now Ireland moves towards smaller families because health and medicine and a modern lifestyle protects that. This is what's happened in Africa and Asia and South America, is that the children don't die, even if the family's having the same number of children. So suddenly the children survive into the 20s, into the 30s. So where's the work? But what the African and South American and Asian countries needed was not corrupt government, was not more medicines and more free medicines. It was jobs, it was industry, it was an economic building. And an autocrat, a corrupt government can siphon that off. You can get elites in any country which take a disproportionate amount of the profit, and that leaves the majority or the weaker. So we've got these considerations that have happened, but it can work for the best. So, for example, on the morning of the American election on November the 5th, America announced that the Biden government had written off £1 billion of Somali debt. So Somalia is an interesting country in East Africa, which has undergone some troubles over the last 30, 40 years between Ethiopia and Egypt and Kenya in that sort of area. And it's broken up into different countries. And the investment down there by the Americans and the Europeans has stabilised the economies, has stabilised the countries. But what the Biden government has done in some sort of deal, which we don't know about, except that because he can, in power, Joe Biden has written off £1 billion of debt to the Somali people. And good luck to them. And good luck to them, because that allows the government, with a lower government debt, to invest more in industry and more in its people, and to develop its economy so that people can thrive in their hometown and move forward from there. And so that's a consideration about where it's given us to this position. We've got this massive youth population. Half the world's population are under 25, 26, and they're looking for jobs, and that's where the migration crisis comes from. And the asylum laws are not fit for purpose. All they have to say is they're under persecution, and then they get the government support under the international conventions for that. So how's that going to change? How is Trump going to change the agenda? Is he going to take the lead? Is he going to follow a similar path to the likes of the governments in the Netherlands and Poland and Hungary that are declaring on the European borders? Is he going to say, if you want to come to America, you can still do that. You have to do it the proper way. You have to make the application and go through the processes. These are things we should consider about how draconian or how fair and what closing the border means. Does it mean not allowing illegal people to pass into a country? The UK is a particular weird one at the moment, because all the economic migrants coming into the UK are coming from France. So what is that all about? Why doesn't the French government stop the illegal asylum seekers in its country from leaving their camp and illegally crossing the border? Why can't they crack down on that crime? But why can't the British just turn them away and stop them? They've got a sea border, and yet they still allow people to cross from a country, France, that is also part of the same international conventions that approve asylum. With America, on the Mexican border, it's not quite the same. The only thing that's stopping everybody from Southern America, South America, getting into North America is the fact that there's no road on the bit between Colombia and Panama. For those of you who know Central America, there's a big, dense tropical jungle at the tip of the neck between the north and the south, below Panama, where they just haven't been able to drive to build a road. So you can't drive from Alaska to the bottom of Chile in South America. because in the middle there's no road. But people still walk through that jungle, but it does slow them down. And once we're in Mexico, you can walk into the United States, and that's what their problem is. Is a wall the answer? Is a different approach by the Mexican government an answer? Is better economies for Colombia, Ecuador, Venezuela the answer? That's for the politicians to decide. But how will that impact and that structure change the ability to work as a nomad, to work living and working abroad? These could be driven by Trump. Trump has only got 4 years. After 4 years, it'll be new governments. But what will the world look like in 2028? We've got to consider how they're going to deal with the Ukraine problem. The Ukraine are facing the Russians off for the Russian land grab, but Russians have also done land grabs in other countries as well, and sorted out their regional conflicts. What about the regional economies that are growing? Where do they side? What do India side with their 1 billion population with their regional economies, China and Russia, to grow up? Or do they stay part of a global community, including America? If America withdraws, then that could allow Russia to do a bit more. Let's not forget that since the Russian war started, with its little excursion to nick a bit of land from the Ukraine, lots of other things have happened. The Iranians have been emboldened. The Iranians generally considered a bit of a terrorist state by the government, have been emboldened, so that their proxy religious political buddies in the Middle East, first of all in Azerbaijan, that invaded and made 120,000 Armenians homeless. They had to flee the border into Armenia. That was the first thing that happened. We see that we've also got a situation where we've got the Gaza government, the proxy political terrorist group Hezbollah in Lebanon as well, and the Houthis in Yemen, all acting to attack Israel, and Israel fight back. So will America continue to support Israel? Will they call Iran's bluff? Will they allow Israel to call Iran's bluff? Now that that's decided, and we know that Trump is going to be the new president, what retaliation will Iran bring against Israel? And what will America do about that? Biden is still the president, but he'll have some influence will come from Trump straight away. So there's unstable influences, are going to make a dramatic change. Russia is already, and China are already investing lots in infrastructure development in Africa. If America pulls back, that will change the politics of the world in those countries as well. So how will the politics in the world align and arise, and what sort of change will that bring for expats living and working abroad? So as they go abroad and different countries, do those countries become not as accessible? I am in the lucky position to go and see UEFA football competition this weekend. So we're going to see Astana, which is the capital of Kazakhstan. But I'm not going to Kazakhstan. They're coming to Cyprus. They're going to play one of the local clubs in the UEFA Conference League. But Astana is an amazing city. If you look at it on the internet, it's got some fascinating buildings. It's a wealthy, oil-rich country. But Kazakhstan is also it's got a land area that's bigger than the whole of Western Europe. So if you take all the European Union countries, Kazakhstan has got more land and more oil. And it's a completely different approach. All those stands, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, Pakistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, all those countries around there, they're all part of what was formerly the Mongolian Empire. So the Mongolian Empire came up in the 12th century. Genghis Khan in Mongolia was left an orphan in a village dispute and cast out as a 10-year-old, and as a consequence he created the biggest land empire in the world, which ran from Mongolia down to Turkey and across to Pakistan and India. This was after Muhammad had done his bit in the 7th century, going across from Arabia into Asia. So it's actually quite a dramatic thing that he did to create the biggest land empire. British Empire might have been a bigger empire altogether, but that was across border and across seas. So I'm looking forward to seeing Astana. It's a wealthy country, but they did have a little bit of a rebellion a couple of years ago, just as the Russians were trying to invade Ukraine. And guess what? The Russians went in and put that rebellion down quite quickly. So, there's a regional alliance, which is, there's nothing wrong with that. Let that play on. But how Trump reacts in the coming years to these different regional powers, do they work together or do they work in isolation? Does he let these regional powers build their own new world going forward, or do we stick in the old world? We don't know. Everything changes in a generation. So 100 years ago, in Europe, 50% of the people were dying in childhood before they reached the age of 20. Now that's changed now. So we've got big opportunities to have different families and to fly and communicate around the world. So how are we going to do that, and where's that going to lead us in the next 4 years? It'd be an interesting scenario and something interesting to look at. So I'm still listening into that, and at the moment, suddenly everybody in the world is Donald Trump's best friend. Love him or hate him, he's now got this position to take America and use its influence in any way that he wants. I saw one report this morning where, on the one hand, the French president phones up and congratulates Trump on winning the election. But his next call is to the German Chancellor to say we need to make a stronger, more united Europe. Because of course the fear for the EU now is that if America pulls back, from NATO, if it pulls back from Europe, then Europe has to defend itself. And it can only do that if it's got a more united base. And as we've seen with the EU elections, the French, the German, the Italian elections this year, and Hungary, that is not the case at the moment. And the countries within the EU cooperation agreement are all pulling in slightly different directions. Do we need individual strong powers in Europe, or do we need a collective EU? And how will that impact the current absolute majority that the British government have got? We've already seen them acting out their playbook, acting out the way to progress forward. But let's not forget that Keir Starmer is an avid, well, not just Keir Starmer, but the Labour Party's front bench are avid anti-Brexiteers, they're avid Remainers. So will they continue to move forward, not necessarily to bring the UK back into the EU, but to make rules and agreements so effectively it's as if Britain was in the EU? That might be a good thing or it might be a bad thing. What we're waiting on at the moment is to see how the electronic travel authorities come in. The EU have been trying to sort out their electronic travel authorities for a long time, and they postponed it. They're supposed to be introduced this next week, but postponed it indefinitely. So electronic travel authorities don't come in straight away, but still visa-free travel will eventually require electronic travel authority. But even so, they can still start to implement the 90 in 180 days rule in the EU. We will see more in the December meeting of EU leaders about which way they're going to go with the Schengen zone and what they can implement and what they can't. Electronic travel authorities already introduced in the UK, and they were due to be extended next year. That was the position before the UK general election. So we could easily see that while that might be extended beyond the Gulf states, which it applies to at the moment, to all countries around the world. But actually more, it wouldn't surprise me if that was again held off to placate Trump, for example, or to placate the EU. Remembering that to enter the USA, you already need electronic travel authority, and for many other countries around the world. It's the EU that can't implement that. So at the moment, as we speak, there's only 3 states left to declare. They're all about 50% votes, but all the others have gone. Oh, sorry, 1, 2, 3. Sorry, 7 states still to vote, but the majority are Republican at the moment. It's just the 2 extremes, the West Coast and the East Coast, which have gone Democrat at the moment. So keep in touch with us. International law won't necessarily change, but the implementation of that will change. And for UK expats living and working abroad, how do you deal with your visa, your travel authorities, your residency permits, your tax residency? This is something we need to consider. Balancing the changes in the EU and the USA, we've also got the Halloween budget from last week in the UK. So we did a live show on that, and you can watch it again on our YouTube show and other media channels. But I just want to do my considered thought on that. So this is not in reflection necessarily to the USA election, because as we're saying already, that it's been declared he's got enough votes already, even waiting for everything else to come through. America's got the biggest GDP in the world, and that gives them a borrowing power to invest money. It gives them a taxation power to raise funds to invest money. Our government doesn't need to invest, but it does help. So you can build roads, you can build airports, you build the infrastructure to let the world and the economy progress. But you don't necessarily need to do that. But when you borrow against that, that borrowing has to be paid back. And a government doesn't have any income. It's not got any earnings. The only income that a government can get is from you, by taxing you. And that is how it gets back. So if it borrows more money, that's got to be paid back by you. Not just the capital, but the interest as well. And the interesting thing about the politics of the UK budget last week was that apparently there's this £20 billion black hole. But then it went on to raise £40 billion of tax. But the interesting thing was, when you look at the figures that are in there, different people weighed in to say this is right, that's wrong. And at the end of the day, it's all a matter of opinion. Yeah. So, you can have 10 fingers, or you can have 8 fingers and 2 thumbs. It's what you put into your definition of your calculation that counts. And the interesting thing about the British debt calculation is they didn't allow for the unfunded government service pensions. So your NHS pension, your military pension, your civil service pension, your teacher's pension was not part of the debt or the liability calculation that they proudly said that they were borrowing against. So actually the debt to liability ratio for the British government is much higher than actually really is. So if you're going to change the rules, change them consistently. But actually what happened was they changed the rules to suit themselves. We feared that they would change the rules on capital gains tax, and it was too simple a thing for them not to do that. And essentially, that's where all the changes came from. But we've got a solution at ProAct. So listen in while I summarise the effective, what the change is, and then I'll tell you what some of the solutions are. Effectively, it's all about capital taxes. Yes, they're raising a lot of money by increasing employers' national insurance contributions, so it doesn't affect somebody's pay packet today. By increasing the cost of employing somebody, you're going to reduce the job offers or reduce the net pay that's offered, or lead to some redundancies, or lead to less investment in jobs or lower pay in the future. So increasing that employer's national insurance rate on earned income for people in the UK means that wages will be lower going forward. So it's another form of long-term austerity, the same as we've seen in the previous 20 years. Without any real recipe to say we're going to invest in this and we're going to invest in that. What are you going to invest in? We'll come to that later as well. Essentially, capital taxes were a bit of a mess. So residential property had been increased to 18 and 24%. Inheritance tax is a capital tax, that was 40% already. But there's also general investments and valuable possessions were income taxed at 10 and 20%. Capital gains tax was introduced 60 years ago by the Labour government, but now they effectively didn't align it with income taxes, but they increased the rate by 80%. So all your investments now, the capital gains tax has gone from 10% to 18%. And if you're a high rate taxpayer, then it's gone from 20% to 24%. So for basic rate taxpayers, it's jumped up a lot. And for basic rate taxpayers, it's not so much. But what they've done is they've aligned investments in financial assets with the capital gains, with residential property. So they say we're not changing the rates, but you kind of miss if you blink the fact that they've increased capital gains tax by 80%. But if you've got an investment and you sell that investment for 200,000, that's automatically a high rate tax liability. So you're going to pay 24% tax on that. So for every 100,000 you make on an investment, you're going to pay 24% tax now. And just think about the morals of that. You've got a government that's taxing you on the income that you earn. They're taxing you on the profit that you make. So you put your investment, your effort into your job, into your business, you build it up, you create the wealth, and then they tax you on that. Okay, so it's taxed income, and then you invest that in your business, in your property, in your investments, and when you make money on that, you get capital gains tax on that as well. Don't forget that when they made this change in capital gains to the current structure in 2015, they removed index linking. That's not been changed. So although they've increased capital gains tax by 80%, you've still got this flat rate liability. So whatever profit you make from 2015 to the day that you sell your asset or you die, you've got inheritance tax on that full gain, including the inflation element. So if property prices go up by 25% from inflation, you're still going to pay capital gains tax at 18 or 24%. And even though you've made no real profit, no net wealth, if a house price goes up but by 100,000, by 22% to 100,000, the replacement house or the next investment is going to cost you the same price. So there's no inflation adjustment in the figures now. So capital gains tax is not only a tax on your investment, your efforts, but it's a tax on the gains that you make, plus the inflation that is suffered in the economy in the meanwhile. So that so it's becoming quite an invidious tax, and it affects it all. But in addition to that, now it includes pensions. So that's an added consideration. Now, pensions were already subject to tax. Now, if you're in a defined benefit pension, you can nominate your spouse or your partner on first death, but they only get 50% of the profit, which is quite interesting. So, but now, if you've got a money purchase scheme, well, potentially, if you die under 75, you could get no tax. If you die over 75, you get income tax. Income tax is up to 45%. But what they've done now is take all your pension fund on death will be treated as a capital asset. The same as, so if you've got £1 million investment fund, that's charged to inheritance tax on your death. If you've got £1 million property, that's charged to inheritance tax on your death. And now, if you've got a pension fund of £1 million, that's subject to inheritance tax on your death. So the personal allowance for inheritance tax have not changed. It's still 325. So if your property is worth 325, or your investment or your pension fund, no inheritance tax. But then everything else is added above that. So your property and your investments may have been 325, but now your pension fund of 100, 200, £1 million is on top of that. And so that's another 40% inheritance tax to be charged. You've still got 2 or 3 years before that comes in, but they're going to catch you, whatever the circumstance is, unless you start taking action now. Government service pensions in the UK are already taxed in the UK, even if you're an expat living and working abroad. And coming out of a defined benefit pension is very, very difficult and expensive. So you need to make that judgment whether that's your situation. If you're in a self-invested scheme, it could be that you need to consider how to get the money out of that pension scheme and get a lower overall tax. It's like with anything, you can make a will to organise your affairs when you die, or you can wait until you die and then sort out your affairs. If you wait, you'll pay the capital gains tax, you'll pay the inheritance tax. If you plan ahead, you'll avoid the cost of delay and probate. That works if you're in the UK, if you're in your home country, or if you're living and working abroad. So for more information and guidance on protecting your pension, talk to us at Proact, and we can help. You can contact us at proactpartnership.com. When you've got an inheritance tax liability, it needs to be paid within 6 months of death. Okay. If not, you're left with either forced sale of the asset or paying interest. So inheritance tax, now that more people are going to be liable for that, because it includes your pension, your investments and your property, you're going to be forced to sell something to realise the cash to pay the inheritance tax bill. If you don't now, the interest are going to charge on that late tax bill within 6 months of the date of your death. So you've got to get over burying and mourning and grieving your partner within 6 months to pay the inheritance tax, which might mean selling your home or selling your investments or cashing in your pension fund to pay that tax. So it's a forced sale scenario. And this is what the farmers are bleeding about in the UK, because they've got a big piece of land which has been in the family for generations to grow produce. But in effect, by treating it under inheritance tax now, you're forcing the issue. A farmer doesn't want to sell a farm, but now he's going to be forced to do it or take out debt to pay that inheritance tax. It's not the principle of what a farming business is. A farm is not in the business of land investment to make profit, but now they're being forced to do that. So it's relative concession to make agricultural land free of inheritance tax, but now those wealthy families with agricultural farms are going to be suffering from that inheritance tax. And of course, one opportunity that presents, which is fantastic, because that allows all the government companies that want to invest in wind farms and solar panel farms in the UK can buy up that land off the dead farmers and start building their wind farms and solar panel farms on cheap land. And obviously there'll be less people around because we won't be able to afford to eat because we're paying more tax. So it's something to bear that in mind, that these things are happening now. So how do you want to get around that? How do you want to avoid these liabilities of taxes on inheritance, on your investments, your property, and your pensions? Pensions is still quite complicated. You have to make, there's a method you have to go through to get it offshore or to get it cashed in. But it's still possible to do that. The changes don't come in for another full 2 years, so these are not changes coming in April 25, but April 27. So by April 27, your pension fund on death is going to be subject to inheritance tax assessment. So you may not have very much, but if you've got a pension fund of 2 million, you're automatically going to be paying 40% inheritance tax on that balance before anybody in your family benefits from it. So it's in effect, it's no different to defined benefit scheme, but for anybody that's spent 10, 20, 30 years building up a pension plan, a pension fund, it's a slap in the teeth because it's not the wealth that you thought it was for your family. So how can you get that inherited? Well, gifting is a way that you can inherit. So within the UK, there's a small amount of gifting that you can do all the time that's free of inheritance tax. But any larger gift is always potentially exempt from inheritance tax. So it takes 2 or 3 years to get below the full inheritance tax rate of 40%. But if you're giving early, then potentially you can make that change for that. So how could an expat live a nice life for a lot less money? Well, that's what nomad working, remote working can do for you. So nomad working, when you're living and working abroad, means that you could do your work online. You could do your work in a way that suits you, but be living in another location, whether that be the Middle East or whether it be the Asia, Africa, Europe, Cyprus, Spain, Portugal. And that would be a way that you could build up assets and tax liabilities outside the UK. If you're an employee, you need the agreement of your employer to work remotely, both in the country in which they work or abroad. So if you want to do that, then you need to have that conversation with your employer. If you want to talk to us about how that goes, you can contact us at projectpartnership.com. But in addition to that, you can consider, if you're not an employee, you're just working on contract or you've got your own business, then you can work remotely and then limit your tax and your liabilities quite effectively. A UK company corporation tax rate hasn't increased, so it was increased, so it's still a bit of a sticking point, but the maximum corporation tax rate is 25%, so you can still get as low as 19%, but maximum corporation tax rate you're going to pay 25%, so that's a flat rate tax. So just working remotely through your UK offshore company can limit the amount of tax you're paying in the UK to 25%. But there's more and there's better ways. So one of the reasons that we chose our Cyprus office was that it's actually quite a cost-effective way. And in 20 years, the Cyprus government still effectively got the same tax rates as they had then. So you're paying a corporation tax rate of 12.5%, half of the UK, a pension tax rate of 5%, flat rate, Dividend tax is at 0%, not up to 39% in the UK. Capital gains tax in Cyprus is 0, and inheritance tax in Cyprus is 0. So they have got income taxes if you're earning money here between 10 and between 20 and 35%. But if you're working from your service company where you're paying corporation tax of 25%, in the UK, you're not going to pay any income tax because you'll be paying dividend tax at 0%. So that's a big opportunity of working in Cyprus remotely. Cyprus has got even more flexibility, more options, because you can be based in Cyprus as a tax resident, but you only have to spend a minimum of 60 days here. Now there are some catches to that, and it is expensive. So changing your tax residence means you have to have accommodation in the country and potentially have a business in the country with social insurance in the country. And social insurance with Cyprus and the UK is linked up. Social insurance with Cyprus and the EU is linked up. So it's not that difficult. It's not an incumbent, but it does change. But if you want to commit to paying less income tax, less corporation tax, and to protecting your money from capital gains taxes and from inheritance taxes, then a jurisdiction like Cyprus can work very well for an expat contractor. And as I say, you only have to spend 60 days in the country if you want to be working in the Middle East or Africa or anywhere in Europe. Okay. So you might want to work in high tax Germany for a company, but you could be a Cyprus tax resident as long as your remote working and your movements of your working and your lifestyle allowed you to do that. So you can do that as an individual. You can do it to pay no tax using dividends on a personal service company. You can use Cyprus to pay 12.5% tax on corporation tax rate, or you can use Cyprus as a family trust. Now, a family trust based in Cyprus, you don't even need to live in Cyprus, but if your business and your assets, you own your property, your investments, your pension funds inside a Cyprus International Trust, you'll pay no income tax, no capital gains tax, no inheritance tax, and you'll have no probate expenses. Now, putting a pension into a family trust is slightly more complicated because a pension is already in a trust. But if you want, even if you don't want to live in Cyprus, Cyprus is still effective zero inheritance tax, zero capital gains tax location for people to work. Your company or your property might still have local taxes. So if you own a property rental in the UK, for example, then that property is a taxable entity when it's sold or when it generates rentable income, but there'll be no additional tax on a family trust. This is what someone like Bill Gates would do with his American Foundation. American foundations pay about 1.39% tax. In UK, a trust can pay up to 45% tax. In Cyprus, a family trust pays no tax at all. So for more information and guidance on that, you can contact us at privatepartnership.com. So, summarising Bonfire Night, it's gone off with a bang, and despite what the media thought, despite the hesitations, we actually found Donald trumped it and became president. So we found out about an hour and a half ago that he won when Wisconsin declared. That took him over the 270 result that he needed of representatives to vote him in at the Presidential Electoral College as president in the next few weeks. So we are on the hour reporting doesn't do that, and what we're looking at is now to consider that Trump has got absolute power. He can't stand for another term. This is his second term already. He's already 78, so he's older than Biden was when he came to power. So what we're looking at now is what he's going to do, what action he's going to take to embrace Europe, embrace the world. What are the regional powers going to do? What is going on when Biden is writing off £1 million of Somalia debt the day before the election? What deal is being done there? So it won't be necessarily the same Trump that we saw in the first term, because he still had an element of trying to get re-elected then. Now it doesn't matter. All the history and all the negatives of the last 10 years, which are going to be in play in a very, very interesting time, and how will that galvanise EU countries to get closer together or stay further apart, and how's that going to impact residency and working abroad and taxation for expats around the world. That's what we're looking at. If you want more help and guidance, we offer free reviews to expats living and working abroad. You can contact us at productpartnership.com. I've got nothing else I can really add at the moment, because the big news is that Trump is elected. The Halloween budget in the UK is out there, and now we need to plan ahead and look at the changes as they unfold. The next big moment is what the EU leaders summit in December will decide in terms of the Schengen zone, the travel area, and the restriction visas there, and how the different countries in the EU will come together to move forward independently or together. Thanks a lot for listening. Join us again next time on the Living and Working Abroad show.